just before you go ripping the forks out your bike, a word of advice would be watch as many of these videos as you can. Just because you watch one video on upside down forks, they are all different. There's so many different types on the market. I've been repairing bikes for many years, and it's always interesting to see the different types. This one is a Honda Fireblade with show forks, standard internals, totally standard stock forks that you get with the bike. The only difference is I've spent a lot of hours and road time, track time, setting up my compression, preloads and rebounds to ensure it's the ride that I want. Pay attention to your compression, your preload on your springs and your rebound. Make sure that both forks are the same. Before you start, write your readings down, tighten them up all the way or out, whatever suits you best, and write down how many turns it was. Make sure they match. If ever you're in doubt, if ever somebody's been messing, you bought a second-hand bike, just go back to the manufacturer's standard settings and work from there. If you'd like to see how the bike is suspended, I'll put a link now on the screen, and there'll also be a link to my other video and the making of the frame in the description below. So to begin with, while it's under the ground, back that nut off there, that keeps your spindle in. Undo those, 3 bolts this side on the mudguard, 3 bolts this side on the mudguard. On this bike there is no need to withdraw those totally, because they simply clamp the spindle either side. They do not hold the spindle in, stop the spindle coming out. On other bikes, those bolts will fit into a recessed cutout in the spindle and they keep it from sliding in and out. That is not the case on this bike. Slacken that off, but still ensuring there's an adequate amount inside the spindle, that you aren't just 2 turns of a thread. Make sure you've definitely got those undone, and gently tap with a hide hammer so the spindle comes out enough that you can get a screwdriver in and start pulling that. At this point, it's a good idea to remove your calipers. Although some bikes the wheel will come off with a caliper on, others they get hung up on here, like this bike. We've got to take the fork legs off anyway. Put the screwdriver in there. With the calipers out the way and any restriction to the handlebars, you may have some leads up the top still and the pipe lines. But now is a good time to see if there's any tight spots in your steering. Also grab the forks and shake them in and out to see if there's any wear in the bearings. Do this at full lock and with it straight. Grab your fork leg and actually move the fork, and you will hear now the play that's in this fork. So not only do we need seals, we now also need the bearings for inside, these sliders for inside of the fork leg. The headset is in good condition. It hasn't covered many miles, this bike, and it is a bit of a fair weather bike and track bike. While the forks are clamped, it's a good idea to work on the top end to avoid any damage from holding it in the vise. So just here, there's a little circlip, remove that. Take off that. Move the little O-ring. If, like me, you're renewing all the seals, just get it off any old air. So before you get undoing this piece here from there, well, we're only going to slacken it off at the moment, you need to back off your compression on the spring, and that's that piece there, that nut there. That nut there is different to that nut there. And what we do is unwind that there. And you see the whole assembly is turning. What that's actually doing is inside that cap there, there's a secondary plate. Well, I've never done these forks before, but normally there's a secondary plate, and inside there is an internal thread, and in turning that nut there, you're turning your damper there, which has got a hexagon on it, and that's driving that plate up and down this top hat assembly. I'll explain all this in a minute when you can see it a bit clearly, but all we're simply doing here is moving the plate upwards here inside there, and that plate pushes on top of the spring. If we was to undo this top cap with that fully screwed in, the compression, you run the risk of damaging these threads on the last full turns. So what you're trying to do here is back the spring off. So if you look at your manual, and what you'll see is softer ride or something like that, less spring compression. That's what we're aiming for, the sloppiest ride possible. That now has stopped. So that spring now is as soft and as unwound as it can possibly go. Now what we need to do is unscrew that lock nut from that damper there. I remember reading a long time ago when I had an R1, this is where you take it out and put it in the bench. I like to use the yoke as a vice, the steering yoke. You've got less risk of running damage to the fork leg. So undo that now from that. So hold across those flats there with a spanner and unscrew that off there. That will then drop down. Be careful because all this is an alloy and it's so easy. You haven't got the right spanners or you slip and shot and it'll just look messy. Now that I've cracked it, you'll see that is starting to wind down. There's no need to hold across the flats anymore because we've backed off the spring. Next thing to do is to slacken this off here. So once you've cracked it, just slowly unwind. When working on the top end and when you undo that nut at the top, it's always best to have the fork leg supported to stop it dropping. Although on some bikes it may come out, on others it won't, depending on the fork configuration at the top and what you've had to take off. Either way, you don't want this fork slamming down and damage the sensitive internals. We're going to undo the top yoke nut now. All the others are undone. That one just there. It's always best to leave that till last, so you're holding the leg. For God's sake, hold your leg, because if you don't, it's just going to hit that floor so hard. I'm running nylon jaws in this vise, but still I'll use a cloth. You need to drain your fork down. Once that's removed, tip the fork up and let the oil drain out of here. Once drained, continue to undo the locking nut here, and then that will go inside. Once that's off, you can then remove this here, bearing in mind there still may be some force from the spring. It won't be stupid, but it may take you by surprise. So the nut was first to come off, damper shot down inside, then remove this assembly here. You will see that's what the spring sits against, and that was fully unwound. If that was closer to here, we would have had more spring compression on there. Now push the outer fork down, a spacer, sleeve, and the spring. Noting which way the spring has come off, the tapered section is at the top here. For now, this is it for the top end. I've made this purposely for this job. The previous bike I did, it was quite inset up the fork, hence I needed this length of Allen key. But you see how the tip's been ground. It's a true 90 degrees on there, there's no worn flats on there. And with the length we can make sure it's square, and also it's got a drive on the end rather than hanging off tubes and stuff on an Allen key. Right, I'm using the large breaker bar. The reason being, it's not force, it's that you're steadier when you have more leverage. I'm gently going. There's no hanging off that, no damage, no slipping. So I've tipped the fork at an angle here as to keep this on, because this is the only thing now keeping the fork together. So I'm undoing this, and there it is. So now we can extract these. And that's where the bolt used to go into. You need to gently take these off. I'm not bothered about the seal, the wiper seal. I have new wiper seals. I'm more concerned about the finish on here. Once the wiper seal's out of the way, on this fork here, there's an internal circlip. This holds all your fork seals in. Just need to gently bring that out. And then you should be able to gently tap your seals out. There we go. While it's in this, inspect around here for water ingress. Have a look down the end of the tube. We're looking for glazing, damage, pickup marks. So once it comes off, this is what you're left with. So there's your top bush of the leg. That bush there goes inside the body here. That one stays on there. That one slides up and down there. That one slides up and down the outer. You have a spacer, and most importantly, and the problem, a seal here. Now you need to note now which way this seal's come off. When we're assembling it, I'll go through it again with you. You got a little spring clip here, and then you've got your dust seal here. I find it's easier to take this one off first. Slide it over that one, otherwise it drops in that groove and it's just a nightmare. This is just out of interest because we're buying new ones. Just looking for even wear on here. And it's not bad actually, it's not even gone through the material, so we know we've done these forks very early. There's your outer one. Again, not worn through. Pretty good. Checking the chrome. Do we need any work to be done on that? Any marks, any pickup marks? Once you've cleaned this all out, you will find a bit of silt in the bottom, so make sure you clean the bottom out. It's quite hard to get to actually. Where the upper bush goes on here for the leg, to avoid damaging the seal, what I've always done is just wrap a bit of tape round. I've also covered the rough turn section at the top and took the tape over the edge. This will give it like a lead for the seals. The total price of this fork seal change, so that's all the fork seals, every single O-ring, all copper washers, the complete reseal of this, including wipers and bushes, has cost me, for genuine parts, it's cost me about £65, including the oil. So there's your wiper seal. This is some fork oil I've got in here, exactly the same oil that's going to be going in the forks in a bit. This is the new fork seal, and it's easy to get this wrong, and the reason being there's a spring garter in there and there's also one in there as well. So traditionally you'd see one and go, oh, well, that goes against the oil. That's not the case with this. On these ones, that's your main sealing face, and that's like a secondary wipe. What you're looking for is the information, the details, goes towards your axle. So there's your details, there's your oil seal, it's like that. And we have the little ring, little spacer ring for the seat of the OD of the seal. Once those are on and you're happy with the direction of them, you can take this off. So once you've got those on, you need to put the bush on. I always put this bush on first, so you don't scrape over this one here. Gently push that down to there, and that's the bit that goes in the other section of the fork. Get the other bush, and that sits on there. Alright, that's all ready to go now. So we've just gently pushed that in now, and what you need to do is make a little special tool, which is what we're going to do. You can buy the proper thing for this, but they're just a rip off. So don't get going round with a punch round here, be any form of punch. You'll just put the seal in on the piss and it will leak and it won't last as long. Hitting it here will just apply uneven pressures on the lip seal. This is how I do it. This is not necessarily the correct way. I take up the leg and I have this, which is basically a piece of pipe, steel pipe, cut in half down its length and all smoothed up with no rough edges. So I have much masking tape on here. I have, this is actually left over from an R1 I had when I did the seals on that. That's just a piece of pipe cut in half along its length, so you've got two halves. Jubilee clip. There's enough masking tape on there to make sure that that tube just fits into there, so it's touching the OD of the seal, the outside diameter of the seal. Have nothing touching the ID of it. Make sure you've got no sharp edges. I've used this quite a few times, so it's all nice and smooth, this is. And then at the moment that is just gently pushed in with my thumbs, nothing else. Just gently put the seal up and then push, and that's your seal fitted. There's no need for hammers, punches, nothing. There's no damage to the shaft, Just make sure you put the right amount of tape on there to space these out for the seal that you're using. Once you're satisfied you've put the seal in enough, get the stop ring in, and again, don't get punching it with hammers, just gently give it a push and listen for the click. There you go, it's done. There's no need to be brutal. There you go, that seal just gently pushes in there. There's no need to use force at all on the wiper seal. That's in. And that's the seals changed. We now need to put the forks together. This here is your inner damper. If you are required to or you want to, you can measure your service limit on your spring. There will be a minimum service length for the spring. The damper on this bike is a sealed unit. That is as an item. The only thing you can replace here is your stop here. Normally these come with a burr on them when it's a battered bike or had a bit of jip. All that is sealed there. A good way of checking it, this fork's empty and you can still hear that there's some squish on it. It's not just got lots of play in it, and there is some resistance as a damper should be. If any doubt you have to change it, but they're very expensive. Now we're on to the next step now, which is filling the forks with oil. There's two ways you can do this. You can either measure it out in a jug, or you can measure the height when it's vertical of free space within the shock. I prefer to do the free space method because unless you've got a very small diameter pot to measure it in, you won't get it accurate. A wide surface area you could be out by quite a bit and it will barely show. This is a small surface area, so the slightest bit will increase the height by quite a amount. So what we have to do here is clamp the fork in there. Now on this bike I'm using Castrol 10 weight oil. I've just always liked Castrol, no reason, not sponsored, not anything, just always like Castrol oils. So I know roughly that this should be 466 for this bike. So at the moment I'm just going to guess that. This is a ½ litre pot. Incidentally, there's no spring in there at the moment. It's just the damper. I know that to be under the required mount. What we need to do now is to bleed it. You can do this by simply raising and lowering it. Be careful that you don't go up too high, because we'll go into that rough section of lower leg. Probably lose a lot of oil. Right, we can feel the oils getting into this now. Because we're trying to get some resistance and we can hear the air coming out. We're starting to get a smooth stroke now of resistance. No air pockets. I simply mark a cable tie with my 90mm, and I know in the centre of that dot there, that's the 90mm. Put that in the top of the fork. You see it's not touching yet. So continue to add oil until obviously it touches the bottom. Picking up on the point I said earlier about your preload on your spring, that's the collar that spins around in there. That's threaded This tends to be the same practice with most bikes. That stays still, yet that turns round, and as that turns round, that there, which goes on the spring, winds itself back up into here, reducing the compression on the spring. That there is all one piece. That is a separate piece. So when you've got the top of the damper here, that engages in there. So when you're actually winding this, okay, you're actually winding that in there. And that there is what adjusts your compression on your springs. After installing that, you've got a little collar that fits in there. On assembly of the fork, it's a good idea to back these out all the way so the oil can flow freely. This will give you plenty of easy movement of the damper. So what I've done here is use the lock nut that you normally see on the outside of the bike, screwed onto there. This will stop your damper sliding through your collar here. Once you've got that there, using a piece of welding wire, I come down to the bottom of the fork leg, tie it off to there, and this simply hooks into these holes that are already here, and the same on the other side. So what I will do is grab this sleeve, pull it down really hard, compressing the spring, and then I hook these in, which keeps it at that height there. I then grab the nut and pull this up to expose the flats on the damper rod, and then you shove the 14mm spanner in, and that keeps everything together here. What you should do according to the manual, put the spanner in there, but you are meant to use the proper tool to pull this up while pulling this down. What we're actually doing here different is just using that nut as opposed to using the proper tool. I've used this method for many bikes. It causes no damage, providing the holes are already in there. If the holes are not already in there, then you have to tie wire around the top to hold this sleeve down. Ideally, if you've got some big burly mates who have a few too many beers and they can apply this pressure on here while you pick this up ready to get your spanner in, that's ideal. But when you're alone, some like myself in the garage, this is how I've always done it. So after replacing that O-ring, we've left that one off for now because we've got to put the top section together. But after that O-ring's changed, wind your compression in all the way so it applies the least amount of force onto the springs. 14mm spanner's still in place, or whatever your bike has. Put that on top. That O-ring's already been changed, that's brand new. And put the lock-in nut back on the top. So once you're satisfied that the locking ring's on and the damper is secured, we can release these wires here and then pull out your spanner. And there we go. Next, all you need to do is bring your outer tube up and screw the two together. The final locking procedure will be once we've got it in the bike, when we've got something to clamp it onto here rather than using a vise. On reassembly, torque everything up to the correct settings, especially the yokes up here, because it's only alloy, it's easily stripped. Don't forget to see your settings how you want them. You rebound your compression, you preload, give the lever a little squeeze, make sure your pads are touching your disc. It's always a popular one for myself, forgetting to do that. Always very exciting on the first run. Some bikes have got a spring clip here. This bike does have one normally, but because the forks are through the yoke slightly, I can't refit that circlip, which is very important that you've done these up correctly. So hope you found it helpful. Safe riding. If you could like and subscribe, that would be much appreciated.